How are you? Thanks for personalizing it all. We have to begin tonight by profusely thanking the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for making this event even possible. I need to thank, in particular, Michelle Knight-Sterner and Jay Lee and Aaron Klein for not locking the door to their offices and running the other way every time they see me coming. I really, really do appreciate all of your support. You've helped us so many times in the past bring great speakers to campus, and so we're very appreciative of that. I'm also thankful that all of you have taken time out of your busy lives, and I know they are busy, to be here tonight, but I think you're going to find it a rewarding experience. Marcie Rendon is an inspiration on so many fronts. Her perseverance as a gifted writer is really starting to pay off for her in a big way, and she's finally beginning to receive the national recognition that she so rightly deserves. Marcie is an enrolled member of the White Earth Nation, and she is on the Oprah magazine's list of 31 Native American authors to read. She's received numerous awards, including a Pinkley Prize, which honors a woman writing crime fiction, a McKnight Distinguished Artist Award that was awarded in 2020, and she is the first Native American woman to do so. She received a 50 over 50 Changemaker Award, and then her award-winning crime novels, two of them, there's actually a third one coming out in 22, and then a fourth one that she's working on now in the series. There's Girl Gone Missing, and then Murder on the Red River. Murder on the Red River was chosen by the Minnesota Center for the Book as the One Book, One Minnesota selection. It was quite an honor. And then Girl Gone Missing was nominated for the G.P. Putnam Sons Sue Grafton Memorial Award, honoring the best novel in a series featuring a female protagonist. Strong female. Yes, there's one thing you'll come to love about this character and her work, Cash. She's a badass, and we like her that way. Marcie also writes children's books and plays for theater. Along with Diego Vasquez, she received the Lost 2017 Spoken Word Immersion Fellowship for work with incarcerated women. And in 2020, she was the recipient of an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Adler University for her years of work as a distinguished social justice champion, author, and arts activist. Pamela Wheelock of the McKnight Foundation says that Marcie brings a strong and necessary voice to so many genres. She's created a tremendous body of work, including poetry, plays, lyrics, and award-winning crime novels, all while raising up other Native voices in our community. Her commitment to making art in community embodies what a distinguished artist means to Minnesota and to McKnight. Some comments of praise I had to weed out. There were so many comments of praise on Marcie and her work, but there are three sort of impactful statements that I latched onto that I'd like to share with you. The Twin Cities Pioneer Press says that Rendon delves deep into the history of Native American communities and the danger of forcing assimilation on a community outside the mainstream of American cultural norms. And then Jeff Berglund, who is the Director of Liberal Studies at Northern Arizona University, he said, Marcie Rendon's portrait of a Native woman detective is vibrant and rooted in the complexities of history and a place haunted by a violent past that refuses to loosen its grip. And then the Grand Rapids Herald Review, a stunning statement that goes like this: Rendon is a natural storyteller and a consummate writer. There isn't a protagonist in recent fiction with the bearing of Rendon's creation, and we're the better for knowing her. Please welcome Marcie Rendon.
Hopefully I won't fall down. much shorter than Judy. Buju, Awanakwe Indigenous Cause, Megazini Dodane, Gawababi Galikog and Dunjaba. My Indian name is Awanakwe. I'm Eagle Clan, and I'm from the White Earth Reservation. I have been talking all day in different classes, so I feel like I'm a little talked out. I hope you all have plenty of questions to ask me when I get done reading. What I've decided to do is read some excerpts from the first book of the Cash series, Murder on the Red River, and then read some other sections from Girl Gone Missing, the second book in the series, and then also share with you some poetry. I have been making my living as a writer since 1990, which if you ask my children, they will tell you that this is not a living. But I can tell you that the mortgage has always been paid and the lights and heat have never been shut off. And that's an accomplishment in my mind. I don't like being told what to do, and so to work a job that I love doing, of writing, and not have to answer to anybody else except for myself or my kids and grandkids, it works for my life, even if it's not that big of an income. There are 3 other crime novels that I wrote before Murder on the Red River. They're sitting in my garage. They will never see the light of day because they're that bad. But once I had finished writing Murder on the Red River, I actually knew that it was a novel that was publishable, that it was worth continuing to seek publication for. And so it was 5 years of submitting to agents and getting rejections, submitting to publishers and getting rejections. For 5 years I was ready to quit, and then Cinco Puntos, my first publisher, sent me a contract. The main character in the books is a young woman named Cash. The stories are set in 1970 up in the Red River Valley, which borders the White Earth Reservation in that part of the state. Cash had been working as a farm laborer since she was 11, when one of her foster mothers, one in a long line of foster mothers, decided she couldn't stand the sight of Cash. Something about Cash's dark hair and perpetually tanned skin next to her blonde daughter's peeling sunburn drove the woman crazy. She banished Cash to the fields to work with the men. At 11, Cash was barely 4'4", 9 inches, and certainly less than 100 pounds. A shave over 5 feet is where she stood now, and more than a sack of potatoes, she thought. Back then, she was smaller than the hay bale she was required to throw, or the potato sack she was told to fill. But she was quick and smart, and what she lacked in physical strength, she made up for in sheer determination. The men laughed at her size, admired her willpower, and soon had her driving tractor and truck that had foot gears rigged with wooden 2x4s so she could reach. When the farm boys teased her about being a girl working with the men and asked why she was driving tractor instead of canning pickled beets, she would always reply, "I need the cash." Except the only cash she got was from her foster father when he hired her out to the neighboring farmers. He would only give her $10 of whatever they were paying. By the end of beet season that first year, Renee Black Bear was forgotten, and Cash was the girl, kid farm labor all the men knew. After a season in the fields, Cash decided there was no way she was going back to washing dishes, canning food, and dusting ceramic trinkets from the old world. She started getting up a half hour early each morning and doing a routine of sit-ups, push-ups, and isometric exercises she'd learned in 6th grade gym class, all to build muscle strength. She sabotaged her housework by burning holes in sheets while ironing and over-seasoning whole kettles of stew meant to feed a household. While each ensured a beating, it wasn't long before she once again was banished outdoors to work with the men. Excuse me. So I know that some of you who were in the classes today, they asked how Cash got her name. That gives you the idea of how she got that name. The other character who befriended Cash is the county sheriff, and his name is Wheaton, and this talks about their relationship. She and Wheaton had known each other a long time. Back when she was 3, her mother had rolled the car with her 3 kids in it in the big ditch north of town. All Cash remembered of that roller coaster ride was her brother and sister landing on top of her. Many times, come to think of it. Wheaton had set Cash down on the long wooden bench in the waiting room of the jail. He went back out to the car and carried her mother in, even though her mother had walked up out of the ditch and seemed perfectly coherent and rational when she explained to Wheaton that all she had done was swerve to Mrs. Skunk, and then she had passed out. Wheaton laid her down in one of the cells without locking the barred door. Cash watched him walk back further into the jail and return with a gray army blanket and a pillow. Talking more to himself than to the little girl on the wooden bench in his jail in the dark of night, he muttered, "You'll have to sleep out here. I'm not putting no 2-year-old in a cell, even though there's a bed in there. You don't need that memory haunting you. There. It's a little hard, but hey, you have to use the bathroom or anything?" Cash shook her head no. She thought it best she'd just stay put, and she didn't tell him she was 3, not 2. She could hear her mom breathing. She lay down on the bench. It was hard, and the wool blanket was scratchy. But even at 3, she knew it was best not to talk or complain. Her brother and sister were at the county hospital, but the hospital wouldn't keep Cash because nothing appeared to be wrong with her. The nurses said the 2 older ones wouldn't be going to school for the rest of the week, and the youngest was best kept with her mother. Wheaton had tried to argue with them, but maybe having to care for 3 children, 2 of them hurt and a drunk mother, had made him give in to the hospital staff. Cash had no memory of that morning waking up in jail, and no memory of what happened to her mom, or her brother and sister for that matter. After that night came a succession of white foster homes, most of which she chose not to think too much about or remember. Once she learned to drive truck, she had been working any and all farm labor jobs anyone would hire her out for. So that one line in there where Cash had no memory of her first morning waking up in jail and no memory of what happened to her mom. When the editor, we were editing the manuscript, my editor was in Texas. I was in Minnesota, and she wrote to me and she said, "You know what, nobody's going to believe that. That's just not believable." And I said, "What do you mean it's not believable? It happened all the time." She said, "What do you mean it happened all the time?" And I said, "This was in 1950 and 1960. Indian kids were routinely taken from our families, put into white foster homes, and if there was 3 kids, they were put in 3 different foster homes. The whole idea was to split the families up." I said, "This happened all the time." And she said, "Oh my God, well that explains a whole lot through the whole rest of the book." And I had only been trying to write a crime story. And what's happened is that the books are being used in university classes to study, some of this stuff about Native kids in foster homes, some of this stuff about boarding schools, the resilience. How many of you guys have heard the term historical trauma? So there's a lot of talk about Native people and historical trauma, but the book really demonstrates the resiliency of many of our people. And so that's another piece that's getting studied along with Cash's PTSD. It really is a crime story. There really is a dead guy in a field, and Cash helps Wheaton solve the crime. There's another section in here that I wanted to, because it's set in Minnesota, and I don't know if I'll be able to find it now. Well, I'm not going to be able to find it. But the other piece about it is that the land itself, the landscape of Minnesota, the land, the rivers, the lakes, the trees all become almost like a character also. because the land informs the farm country, it informs the crops that that Cash as a farm laborer is working in. So there's a piece about that in there. Maybe I can come back to that later. So this one here is about a murder that happens. Cash helps Wheaton solve that murder. Girl Gone Missing is exactly what the title is about. Some girls go missing. And again, the books are set in 1970. And at that time in history, here in the state, the women who were being trafficked primarily were blonde, blue-eyed girls from farm country. And there was a pipeline that went from farm country up here down to the Twin Cities and then out to Chicago, New York, and the coast. The trafficking that was happening of Indian women at that time was out of the Duluth shipping ports. And that trafficking still goes on. So right now there's a lot of information in the news about the 5,000 plus missing and murdered Indian women that are currently missing or murdered. And so people have asked me, well, why isn't it Indian women in your Girl Gone Missing book? And it's because it was set in 1970, and at that time it was the farm girls from around the Midwest here that were going missing. In Murder on the Red River, Cash uses her intuitive abilities, sensing abilities to actually help solve the crime. In Girl Gone Missing, she relies on her dreams. And I'll just start on the beginning of the book. Cash pulled herself up and out of the bedroom window. Her heart beat in her ears and she shivered uncontrollably. She took off running barefoot, zigzagging across the damp ground. Her eyes darted left and right. She ran toward the plowed field in the direction that led to town. Her foot sank into the cold, wet dirt of the furrowed field. When she tried to pull her foot up, her front leg sank into the dirt even deeper. She threw herself forward, clawing at the mud with her bare hands, hearing the heavy, labored breathing of a person chasing her. Fear forced her from her body so that she was soon flying above herself. She looked back to see who was chasing her, but all she could see was a body, the face obscured in the darkness. She looked down and could see herself stretched out in the mud below, buried to her knees, arms flailing. Some of her long brown hair was tangled up in her hands as she struggled to steady herself. But the body changed abruptly, no longer her struggling, not a short, dark-haired Indian girl, but a pale, tall, and bony blonde who looked up at Cash and screamed, "Help me." On that sunny note, Cash crawled out of bed, got dressed, and headed from Fargo to the Moorhead State campus on the other side of town. So that's the beginning of the book. In this book, she had the brother and sister that were in the car that rolled over, and then she never saw them again. In this book, brother shows up. I thought I had this all neatly marked, and apparently I don't. Well, my notes are all mixed up, guys. Talk among yourselves. Chit chat, check your phones. Okay, here we go. So again, another dream sequence. She lifted the lever of the truck's hydraulic system and heard the steady thump, thump, thump of fat sugar beets falling onto the conveyor belt that carried them into the factory. Cash felt the truck start to float as the thumping got louder and louder and took on the rhythm of shave and a haircut 2 bits. Cash sat up quickly in bed. She glanced out a crack in the curtain hanging over the bedroom window. It was still night out. She threw off the sheet and pulled on jeans and a t-shirt. It couldn't be Jim knocking like that. He would knock softly. If she didn't answer right away, he would creep back down the wooden stairs and go home. The knocking started again. Cash walked to the kitchen door without turning on any lights. Outside the door, silhouetted in dim light from the street lights, stood a guy wearing an army fatigue jacket. "Renee," he said loudly, hand mid-knock. "Renee Black Bear." Cash opened the inside door, but not the screen door. "Well, yeah? Open the door for your brother, why don't you?" "Huh?" "Renee, it's me, your brother, let me in." Cash's heart was beating louder than the knocking. She looked out into the street. It seemed solid. She looked at the kitchen table. It looked solid too. She reached over and touched the back of the wooden chair she always sat on. It was solid. She reached across her body and squeezed her left bicep with her right hand. Bare seconds passed while she checked reality, making sure she wasn't dreaming. She pushed the screen door outward. The guy in the army fatigue jacket stepped into her kitchen. He set a green duffel bag down on the floor. Cash pulled the string above the kitchen table to turn on the overhead light. She walked back to the bed in the living room and looked at the clock. It was 6 a.m. She had set her alarm to go off at 8 so she could make it to her 8:30 class. She stood there, her back to the kitchen, her heart beating, her chest tight, wondering if she was going to pass out. She took a deep breath and turned and walked back into the kitchen again without really looking at this guy who said he was her brother. He had pulled out a chair and was sitting at the table watching her. She put water on the sink faucet into her aluminum coffee pot and then measured a small handful of coffee grounds to dump into the pot. She used a match to light the gas burner. She set the pot on to boil. All the while she looked at him out of her peripheral vision. He wasn't very tall. His black hair was cut military short. Lean, sinewy is the word that came to her mind. Brown skin, scarred knuckles. His brown eyes, distant but lively, jumped around her apartment, watching her, checking out her space. He lit a filterless cigarette from a pack of Camels. With the first puff, he blew smoke rings over the table. Ash stood at the stove, waiting, watching for the coffee to boil, all the while checking him out. Her chest was still steel-trapped tight, but her heart had slowed a bit. She watched the coffee pot boil, the coffee simmering. She rotated around, reached into the open cupboard behind her, and took out 2 thick white ceramic coffee mugs. She put one cup down in front of the army guy and the other down for herself. She hesitated, unsure what to do next. He was sitting in the chair she always sat in. She finally sat down opposite him. He blew on the cup of steaming coffee before taking a cautious sip. "Best coffee I've had since stateside. Suppose you're wondering how I found you." He lit another cigarette. Cash thought she smoked a lot, but this guy was chain smoking, lighting one cigarette off the other. "I got back a couple weeks ago. Got kicked out of the family that adopted me. Went and fought to keep America safe, become a man. Came home, and the first time I got drunk, they kicked me out. Told me to never come back. Been doing the old man shit work since I was 8 years old. Goddamn adopted me, too. Told everyone in church I was their kid, just like one of theirs. Shit. All my hard work is going to go to that pansy-ass kid of his, not to me. Like he had me believing all those years, hoping and dreaming all them years, telling everyone I was his, just like a real son. Fuck." He took a big swallow of coffee. "Ah, heck," he grinned over the coffee. "Easy come, easy go." He looked at her. "Damn, if you don't look just like Ma, except your hair is straight, not curly like hers." And then it goes on. This is their first meeting since she was 3. And he actually becomes an integral part of the story and helping to rescue the girls who are missing. I don't know how much more I can read without doing spoiler alerts. I know that sometimes I've read and then people have said, "No, I didn't want to know that much about it." So those 2 books, you don't have to read one in order to read the other. They're not that kind of a series. And then book 3, which is currently titled Sinister Graves, will come out in the fall of 22. And all of the books are being reissued by Soho Press. So I switched publishers. I am also a poet. You guys live on this campus where this amazing journal comes out, the Yellow Medicine Review. Yeah, I mean, this is like gold in Indian country. And it's a place where some of the best Native writers appear, and it's where some people get their first poem or short story ever published. This is from the fall 2020 issue. And the title of it is Women's Wisdom, Women's Strength, edited by Marie Furman. And I submitted this poem. We are women. We are women whose hearts have never touched the ground. When others think we are broken, wailing grief for stolen children, missing daughters, aunties, mothers, we heal our hearts with water from our tears. When others think we are beaten, they mistake our hidden rage for submission. Backed into a corner, we tag each other in, a steady stream of women warriors never once uttering defeat. They take our silence for acquiescence, not realizing we mind talk, dream talk to spirits, gathering knowledge, strength for survivance for ourselves and future generations. We are women who shake the ground we walk on, a steady stream of water walkers who dream the healing of the water flowing through the life vein of the Turtle Isle, a steady stream of jingle dancers, a vision carried forward, soft footsteps on a key, circle round in healing, circle round, circle round. A steady stream of red-shawled women, singing spirits home, calling for the healing of women beaten bound. A steady stream of women warriors, the concrete jungle now a battleground, march on city pavement demanding justice for once and for all. We are women whose hearts have never touched the ground. We are women who shake the ground we walk on. We dream our visions forward for all who will be born. So that one is in that book there. I won't fall, but maybe everything else will. So anyways, I decided that I would just read some poetry also. And all of my poems are untitled. Almost all of them are. Except for one that's going to come out in the next Yellow Medicine Review. The title of that one is Go Ahead and Hate Me. That's about the only one I've ever titled, I think. So this one here, a common misconception is the assumption that God created flowers on a higher plane than dirt, or say, tornadoes. My mother never rode on horses. She ran with Mustangs. One time a tornado touched down, saw her, and retreated back from where it came. Another time, a man decided to drink his fill of her. She washed his eyes out with bleach. They left her lying naked on the barroom floor. Her laughter drove them crazy. My father couldn't hold her. She pinned him to the sky. While she hitchhiked across the country, he let them take his pride. Her body ravished, alcohol, TB. They say she jumped the prison wall. The wind never blessed her back. She'd pass salmon on their way to spawn. It was too hot, so she never did come in from the cold. Her final blanket, a Montana snowfall. Yes, God created man in his own image. Woman made her own. This next one is my most published poem. Most recently, it's in Joy Harjo, who is the Poet Laureate for the United States. She has a book, an anthology of poets When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through is the title of that anthology. And this poem of mine is in that book. It's probably one of my oldest published poems, and it's been, can't even tell you how many times it's been republished. What's an Indian woman to do when the white girls act more Indian than the Indian women do? My tongue trips over to Conchula, mumbles around word Matakiaswe. My Ojibwe's been corrected by a blonde U of M undergraduate. What's an Indian woman to do? Much to my ex-husband's dismay, I never learned the humble, spiritual Native woman stance, legs tied, arms closed, head bowed, 3 paces behind. My mother worked and fought with men, strode across fields, 100-pound potato sacks on shoulders broad as any man's. The most traditional thing my grandfather taught me was what jibik on a cue stick to win a game of pool. So I never learned the finer Indian arts so many white women have become adept at. Sometimes I go to powwows, see them selling wares. Somehow the little crystals tied on leather pouches never pull my Indian heart. What's an Indian woman to do? I remember Kathy, she who sees the spirit lights, when she was still Katrina Olson from Mankato, Minnesota. And Raven woman? Damn, I swear I knew her when she was a Jewish girl over in St. Paul. As my hair grays, theirs gets darker month by month, their reservation accents thicker year by year. Used to be, reincarnation only happened to the dead. What's an Indian woman to do when the white girls act more Indian than the Indians do? So that one is actually funny, you guys. Yeah, it's one of those things where people say, my God, you're so angry. Well, like, you know what, it's a joke. It is a joke, and it's real, but it's funny, okay? Let's see, then the last one. And this one is also in a recent anthology by Joy Harjo. You can access it online. It's an online map with recordings where we each read our writings of 47 contemporary Native American poets. Living Nations, Living Words is what you would Google, but it's also in a print anthology by W.W. Norton. My mother in 7th grade ran from a South Dakota boarding school back home to White Earth in an age before interstate highways, cell phones, or Google Maps. That determination and love of life is resilience. A Native father sitting in Perkins after working a late shift with a 2-year-old toddler in a high chair explains that the baby's mother showed up at his door with a child he didn't know existed and said, "Here, I've done this for 2 years, I'm done, he's yours." He didn't hesitate to do the right thing. That is resilience. The woman who lost her child to child protection because she was caught in the cycle of addiction and street life, sent to prison, who spent 5 years getting clean, going to meetings, petitioning the court against all odds to regain custody of her child. That is resilience. The poet who grew up with a not-so-easy life in Oklahoma, resilience gave her words to write, now U.S. Poet Laureate. Resilience also gave her music in her heart that pours out of her saxophone, healing the hearts of listeners. A Native artist living on the street collected discarded lipstick and eyeshadow to create gallery-worthy paintings, creating beauty out of beauty discards. That is resilience. My father, along with thousands of other fathers, for more generations than we want to remember, sat alone, not changing residence, waiting, waiting, waiting for children to return. That is resilience. Men who went to prison, who somehow came out and started businesses, who raised families and took jobs way below their skill level, who became sweat lodge runners, sun dancers, and pipe carriers. That is resilience. The children raised in families outside the culture who followed their heart spirit back home, facing rejection, ridicule, identity questioning, but staying, becoming one with the community, one with their tribe. That is resilience. Mothers who, with or without shame, have stood in line at Salvation Army for cheap toy giveaways, food shelf lines, who sit in welfare offices again and again because it is one way to keep the family going. That is resilience. Our relatives who never hesitate to go to war, wars that are never ours. Code talkers, tunnel rats, snipers, those who walk point, medics. They die fighting because that is what we do. Or they come home and hide the pain as best they can and carry flags at grand entry. Or not. That is resilience. People who give more than they get, mothers who love their children, fathers who stay, grandparents who babysit, even in a wheelchair. We create beauty out of scraps, pull cars together with duct tape, work jobs and sell beadwork for cash to have a little extra. Make fry bread even though we know it isn't good for the diabetes, but because it's good for the spirit. Resilience is making decisions that benefit the whole instead of just the individual. It is getting up and putting one foot in front of the other, even when you don't want to. This is our resilience. So that's kind of the end of reading. I'm hoping that you have a bunch of questions. Or not. I know, how many of you were with me in a class today already? You may be all questioned now. Oh, here's one. Okay.
So how do you generate your idea for your novel posters?
So the cash novels, I have, yeah. Well, I kind of have to tell the whole story because I was trying to write crime. I had 3 novels; they were failures, and I had decided to write fluff, chick lit kind of stuff. And I sat down to write a fluff story about a girl going to Nashville to break into the music industry. And the character Cash literally appeared, like over here, and said, no, 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 no. This is the story you're going to write. And as long as I wrote the story that she was sort of telling me to write, it worked, and I could tell that it was working. And that's how Cash came into existence. And I didn't know, I wanted to write a series, but I didn't know that this was going to be the series. But she was such a strong character that, and then by the time I'd finished book 1, I knew what I wanted to write for book 2. By the time I was done with book 2, I knew what book 3 was. And by the time I was done with book 3, I had the beginning of book 4. So that's how that series came into being. I'm working on a contemporary novel right now, which is brand new characters and it's set in present time. And I had to, I don't know, go into my mind and just like, okay, who do I want? What do I want? You know, what should it be like? And just kind of work it in my mind. And then once I had the 3 characters, then I could sit down and write. So it was actually just going internal. The poetry, the best poetry that I write, the poetry that gets published the most, let me put it that way, it seems to just pop into my brain. The What's an Indian Woman to Do, that was like 2 o'clock in the morning, wake up, write the whole thing out, it was done. Resilience, same with that one. You know, I mean, I don't know where. I think because I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I'm always doing, you know, running kids around, doing dishes, cleaning the house. I'm always writing in my head. So I think that some of the stuff gets worked out, and then when I actually have to sit down to write, it appears effortless, or like it's already there, but I think I've just been working it for months or weeks in my head. Yes. Yeah.
So the trash, the garbage writings, right? Do you share those with anyone? Does like family or friends ever get to see those, or do you just lock them away? Do you revisit them?
The ones that are in the garage?
Yeah, the ones that you're not.
You know, there's a murder in one of them that I want to use in a story. And you may be right that I should go back and reread them, there might, because my advice to all writers is never throw away anything that you write. You know, so like in that one book, there's a murder that I really like. It would be perfect in another story. But maybe there's stuff to salvage in there, I don't know. But no, nobody, my family's not interested in my writing. Like they don't, you know, they wouldn't go out to the garages and try to read it.
You kind of estimate about how many copies you have sold of any of your books for next year?
I don't know how many. I mean, if you self-publish, I know that many people these days, because of the internet and all, are self-publishing. And when you self-publish, you actually have to keep track. Like you have to know how many are sold, how many, whatever. I have an agent and I have a publisher that, you know, somebody else that publishes it. So I'm not keeping track of how many copies are sold. I get a royalty statement twice a year. I'm supposed to get a royalty. I will get a royalty statement twice a year. And on that royalty statement, it tells how many books have sold, et cetera, et cetera. But I honestly can't tell you that I've ever paid any attention to the number as opposed to my check. But I should count. Somebody should count those numbers to make sure that the numbers equal the check, right? I think that's what the agent's supposed to do. Yes.
The poem where the woman throws the blanket for a pack of fries, did that really happen?
Yes.
Who's the woman in the poem?
The poem is about my mother. I mean, I think that what people don't realize is the level of racism that historically has gotten directed at Native people and continues to be directed at Native people. So like when my mother was your age, she could not get a job working as a woman. She couldn't do daycare, she couldn't do housework. The only job that anybody would hire her for was in the field with men. And as soon as you put a woman in a male environment, the potential for God knows what to happens, especially when it is a woman of color. So all kinds of awful things happened. I think what's important is to acknowledge that those kinds of things happened and continue to happen. When you think about the 5,000 missing murdered Indian women that are currently murdered and or missing, these things are still occurring. It doesn't do anybody any good to get mired down in guilt. It's like, what can we actually do to change the situation? And how do we build relationships with each other so that this kind of thing can stop happening? But yeah, and not being afraid of the stories. There was a young man behind you, Sue, first. One of you guys had your hand. Yes.
How do you determine that one of your writings is trash?
Is what?
Trash. Do you know what you're talking about?
The ones that are in the garage?
Yeah.
They're just awful.
You know, so like my goal, since I started writing for money, was to write crime novels so that I could break into that market. And I think with those books, I was practicing and I was trying too hard. And neither of those books has a good main character that people would like. It's just kind of this mishmash of people dying, people getting killed, people, you know, bad stuff happening. Well, that doesn't really quite make a coherent story. I thought it did at the time, but it didn't work. And I knew that. With writing the Cash stories, and then the series that I'm working on now, there's identifiable characters that people care about. And there's a storyline where something is happening, and yes, people die or something tragic happens, but there's resolution. You know, there's some resolution that happens. So that they're more coherent stories. And I think that anybody who's writing, you just have to write and write and write and write, and you're gonna have all kinds of stuff that you actually will know if it's any good or not. I mean, the other thing that's important is to listen to your teachers or listen to your peers. If you say, well, you read this, and they kind of, well, that's kind of good. You can kind of think, wow, that wasn't that good. You know, there's something wrong with it. How do you find people who will critique your work in a way that's useful? So I'm part of a couple writing groups where we read each other's work and we give constructive criticism. And you can't be afraid of people saying, you know, this doesn't really work. This character really isn't believable. And being open to changing your writing. Lots of times when we first start writing, we get attached to our work. We think it's the best thing ever. And oftentimes, it really isn't. And we really just have to practice writing and build our skill, build our craft so that our writing does get better. I talked in a class earlier today about what I think are my dumbest stories ever. Like I wrote a story about the midwife that delivered Jesus. And in my mind, this was the dumbest thing I ever wrote. But it's been published like 3 or 4 times and made me some money. It won a writing award out of a journal in Canada. And in my mind, it's still like the dumbest thing I ever wrote. But you know, like, so you're not always the best judge of your own work either. Back to the ones that are in the garage. Maybe I really should revisit them and see if they're as bad as I remember them being. Sue.
I feel like this comment almost isn't there, but when we're talking about missing women, I realized that you told me about a missing man, and I thought because it's relatively close here, you might share with us what you really know.
You guys are all in Dakota country. This is the land of the Dakota people. During the war of, oh God, I'm gonna blank on the date, when they hung the Dakota at 1862. It was just a few months after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So in 1 month he frees the slaves. 3 months later he orders the hanging of 38 Dakota over here at Mankato. And not only that, but exiled the Dakota from the state of Minnesota. And it's still on the law books in the state of Minnesota that the Dakota should not be here. Although the Lower Sioux community is here, the Upper Sioux community, Shakopee, Prairie Island, there are Dakota communities here in this southern part of the state. I'm trying to think of how to say this without naming names and be respectful of people's confidentiality. It isn't just Native women that are disappearing. Have you guys seen the hashtag MMIW? Hashtag MMIW, missing and murdered Indian women. And it's for the, like I said, 5,000 plus Indian women that they know are murdered or missing on this continent. What they're not doing is counting the number of Native men that are also missing. We have a family friend who, I want to say he was 23 years old. The last picture of him is leaving a gas station here in southern Minnesota. He's been gone for 3 years. Nobody knows if he's dead or alive. And so he's one of the missing and murdered Indian people. The task force in Fargo, North Dakota has changed their hashtag from MMIW to MMIP, missing or murdered Indian people, because there really are so many Native men who are missing. And many of them tend to be young. And we don't know. We don't know why they're missing. Are they trafficked? Are they killed? Did they get caught in a bad drug deal? Did somebody just kill them and bury them in the woods? I mean, we don't know. But it's a very real issue in Indian country, to the point where, I mean, how many of your parents have you tracked on your phone? You know, every single one of my kids is on this phone, and most of my grandkids that have a phone. And it's because we say to each other, you know, lock your doors. Don't ever go anyplace alone. You know, if you're going to the gas station, take somebody with you, because you never know. There are just too many people where this is actually happening to them today. And it doesn't matter whether it's male or female. Yeah. On that depressing note, anyone got a cheery question? I mean, I think it's important that as Native people, we are way more resilient than we are traumatized.
Why a mystery?
Because it's what I like to read. I read crime. Like, I'm a compulsive reader. And I'm always reading crime, whether it's John Sanford, Lee Child, the Wallander series. I think too, let me see if I can describe it. Well, there's a couple things. One, I was raised rural, and there are so many secrets in rural countries, or in rural towns, communities, on farms. People end up dead. People disappear. You know, you hear, oh, so-and-so committed suicide. You think, no, they didn't. You know, like, that person got killed. You know, so there are all these crimes that happened when I was growing up. And I wanted I think I wanted some kind of resolution for them. So a way to get resolution is to write it. I also think that given the violence that has been directed at Native people, again, writing a crime novel and getting a resolution is a way to resolve some of that continued, violence that comes at us. And I just like the genre. I like reading it. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, sorry, yeah. I'm sorry. What advice do I have for writers who? I think you just have to write, for one thing. I mean, people, if I'm answering your question right, you need to write and get your work out there. Be a part of a writing group that is a part of your community, or I don't even think it has to be your own community. It has to be people who you get along with, who think like you, and who are supportive of you, who want you to succeed. And then, like right now in the publishing world, there's this push for diversity in publication. So there's an organization called We Need Diverse Voices, and if you Google them, there's different things that they do throughout the year where you can apply for a scholarship to attend a particular diverse group of people's writing experience. There might be We Need Diverse Voices, Children's Lit. We need diverse voices, Native American writers. We need diverse voices, Asian writers. So it's finding a niche like that and becoming a part of that group. Excuse me. There are all kinds of places on Twitter. hashtag pitch wars, where if you have a story or a thing that you've already worked on and completed, where you can pitch it to an agent or a publisher. There's another hashtag, I don't know how much it's in use anymore, Our Own Voices. But sometimes, like becoming a part of those kinds of groups. Am I answering your question? Okay. And then talk to Judy. Yes.
What was your favorite question from classes today?
I don't know if it was my favorite question, but I got to talk about stalking Stephen King. Well, I finally got to meet him when he came to the Twin Cities for the Wordplay Conference a couple of years ago. I was telling I don't know how we got to that part of the conversation, but Stephen King is one of my favorite writers. And it was like kind of who I aspire to, write like Stephen King. And I used to visit a family in Passamaquoddy, Maine every year. So you fly into Bangor. So every time I was in the Bangor airport, I would walk through the whole airport looking for Stephen King. Never saw him. And this is how long ago it was. There were still phone books. And so I looked in the phone book, and there was a Stephen King in Bangor, Maine. And so I called the number. And this woman answered, and I said, "Hi, is Stephen King there?" And she says, "Oh, I bet you're looking for Stephen King, the author." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "My Stephen King is the plumber." Click. So I know that I called his house, And then I had a friend from that same area who went to AA meetings, 12-step meetings, and that was one of the meetings that he went to. And I would beg her to take me to a meeting with her, and she never would. She never did. Bless her heart. That's my, stalking Stephen King story. But then at Wordplay, when he was at Wordplay, we got to meet him. And I got my picture taken with him, and I threatened to use that as my, what is it? That kind of headshot thing. Just, use me and Stephen King. That. Yeah.
Then you write some book about it.
Right. And I get killed off in it. Or get haunted by some crazy dog. So I don't know. It's easier for me to answer questions than it is to sort of just talk nonstop. I'm not much of a lecturer. I don't have an MFA. I didn't study writing. I didn't study literature. What I have done is I've just written and write and submit and be a part of different groups and things like that to keep getting better at the skill. It's what I love to do, but the writing, so.
I'm thinking about all of the things that you've done in your life that led you to writing, that weren't writing, that you've been open to such a variety of experience, and you've tried other things, where you started from a place where I know I don't like working for an employer. I know I want, perhaps even, I don't know what point you started to be a writer, but I know that you were prepared to do some really extraordinary things. I'm envisioning you get who you are. Can you talk a little bit about, you want to go in a direction in life? What that looks like?
I'm not even sure how to answer the question because I'm surprised at people who don't have a variety of friends. I have a diverse range of friends from young to old, all different ages, races, languages. And then people will say, well, you know, this is my little tiny circle of friends. And I'm like, how can you live like that? You know, like, the world is so big. And so I think there's something about always being curious. Patrick Scully, he's a performance artist in Minneapolis. He was one of the first gay men to come out living with AIDS. And he's a performance artist. And I asked him one time, you know, like, he was a blonde, blue-eyed guy raised someplace here in southern Minnesota. I said, how did you become this, like, rock star performance artist in Minneapolis? And he said, I never lost my curiosity. And he would follow it. You know, so like he said, one day he was driving through Mankato and he saw a sign that said powwow. And it never occurred to him that he wouldn't be welcome. He just pulled off the road and went to the powwow. And it was all Indians, and he stood out. 6'4", blonde, blue-eyed. You know, but not letting yourself be afraid to try things, to do things, to go places. Making mistakes. One time I was hired to interview the head of the Somali organization in the Twin Cities. It was July in Minneapolis. It was hot, it was humid, and I was doing journalism. I showed up to interview the head of the organization wearing shorts, not short shorts, but shorts, and a tank top. And as soon as I sat down and saw all of the women fully clothed, wearing hijabs, I felt like a total idiot. You know, like totally inappropriate, totally culturally unaware, had no business showing up like that. But the guy was so gracious. He let me interview him, he didn't shame me, and every person in that agency, I'm sure, walked through and stared at me, you know? But it's like, I could have run in shame, I could have, you know, whatever, but it was like I decided, I just stayed and did the interview, submitted it, and actually when I see that person now, you know, we say, hi, you know, so it's like, how do you put your, why are we so afraid of difference? Why are we so afraid to try anything different? So pushing yourself to always do different things, be curious. If you're curious, ask questions. I mean, I had asked the dumbest questions. One time I was in a group of women. This is, you know, just dumb. Group of women, and some of the women were African American, and we were talking about where we were from, and one of the women said she was from Iowa. And like an idiot, I said, there are black people in Iowa? You know, and, you know, I didn't know that. Somehow in my mind, Iowa was nothing but white people. You know, and it came out of my mouth. You know, nobody beat me up. They gave me dirty looks. They laughed at me. But you survive dirty looks. You can survive being laughed at. You know, but we're so timid. So I think that part of being a writer is putting yourself in situations where you're not always comfortable. And then also eavesdropping. I listen to everything. You know, I'm still, there's a story that I want to write. I was in Albuquerque, I was in a coffee shop with a group of people. They were sitting drinking coffee, and at the table over, this guy got down on his knees and proposed to the woman that he was with. And she said no. He burst into tears, sat down, and she walked out. And I thought, man, somehow I got to get that into a story someday. You know, so it's like being aware of your surroundings and always watching these things and like storing them away, either in your brain or on pieces of paper that you can use in something later on. We must be out of time, folks, right? Are we pushing? Other questions? Other things you want to know? I'm embarrassing myself up here. but being curious and eavesdropping, and going places and doing things and always, saying yes. What's that one song? Dance if there's a song. Dance like nobody's looking. Get up and dance if the music's playing. Show up in Marshall, Minnesota.
Sacrifice a more smaller writers that you look up to that help inspire your work.
Say that again?
Sacrifice a more smaller writers that you look up to that help influence your work.
Well, I read crime, like I said. Any of the major crime writers, John Sanford, John Grisham, Lee Child, the woman who writes the A is for, B is for, C is for, those books, the Kellermans, any crime novel, like the Wallander series. With the John Sanford books, I actually outlined one to try and figure out how he wrote. And what I realized is that he's a journalist. And, I took a journalism internship, and you learn how to write on deadline, you learn how to write fast, you learn how to create a quick scene, But my mentor was Jim Northrup, a writer from the Fond du Lac Reservation who, back in the early 90s, he was the mentor at the Loft Inroads Writers of Color program. And I was one of the people that was chosen to be one of the mentees. And at that point in time, I couldn't talk like I'm doing now. I talk like this. And if you said hi to me, 9 times out of 10, I'd burst into tears. I just, horrible shyness. And so I would go to these meetings with him, and I would write, and he would make us read them out loud. And I would be crying while I was reading and shaking. And one of the things he told me is, he said, if you're going to be a writer, and especially if you're going to do poetry, you're going to have to learn how to talk to people. And that as a writer, part of what you're selling is yourself. Like, you're the image. And that's even more true today, I think, in the publishing world than it was back then. They want, it's kind of like in country western music, they want the skinny, sexy singer, no matter what the voice is like, So he said you have to be willing to talk to people, and you have to learn how to read your work and how to read your poetry. I took performance art classes, I took speech classes, I got up on stage, I did acting, in order to get to this place where I can talk to you like I'm talking to you tonight. And every time, like, he never read I don't think he ever read my work. Yeah, I would, he would always say, send me your work, send me your work. He said, and then he would just say, good, what are you gonna write next? But it was his encouragement as a Native man, as another Native person, that he really believed in. He let me know that what I was doing was important, and that it was important that as a Native woman, I kept trying and producing and putting out. That was probably the biggest influence on me to keep writing. And then also to really work to be a speaker, like I'm talking to you tonight, and to read my work. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a hard time. So the question is, the books are focused on hard issues, on racism, repression, and how do I keep my focus? I think that when I'm writing, what I'm focusing on is not the oppression, but on the resilience of the character. These books, Murder on the Red River, Girl Gone Missing, are easy for me to write. I love Cash. She's strong, she's powerful. There are all kinds of awful things that happen, but she rises above them. She solves them. One of the hardest things that I've ever written was a nonfiction book. It was about Native artists, and we got an advance from a publishing company to write about 7 Native American artists in the state of Minnesota. And we said we would write about a little blurb about them, here's their paintings, and a little blurb about the painter. And the publisher wanted us to explain the paintings. Now, the paintings were about sexual abuse in boarding schools. The paintings were about the hanging of the 38. The paintings were about the war in the Middle East. The paintings were, they were hard issues. And I said to the publisher, no, just, let the paintings speak for themselves. And, we'll write a little blurb about the artist. The paintings are beautiful, it'll be a beautiful book. And she just kept insisting that I explain the paintings. And I spent a month doing the research. And as far back as you go, back into the kings and queens in Spain and England, what they wanted to do was kill the Indians on this continent. Fact. Just fact. Kill the Indians. And by the end of the month of doing that research, I was like, I'm not supposed to be here, my children aren't supposed to be here, my grandchildren aren't supposed to be here, my great-grand... I went into bed and didn't come out for 3 days because the facts of that situation were so hard on me. But I wrote what she wanted. She wanted the paintings explained, so I wrote that. She fired us from the project and never published the book. She said the book reeked of hatred of white people and something or other against the Catholic Church. So one, I'm not going to take on projects like that anymore. That sink me that bad. And if I'm going to write something, I really believe that, I don't know, I want things, I want to show the resiliency and the strength of who we are. And yes, horrible things have happened, but it's the resiliency that I hope comes through in the books and even in my poetry. I hope that there are hard things in there, but I'm hoping that it's the resiliency that people actually react to. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Trudy, and to the university, and to all of you who have patiently listened to me all day long. Miigwech.
Marcie is going to be signing books up front here. There are books for sale here. I know some of you bought yours ahead of time, so feel free to come down and get one of her books or get both of the books that she has for sale down here. And also, there is, what do you call this thing?
QR code.
There's a QR code, and it's for
It's for us for the evaluation
for the evaluation. So please come down, click on the QR code, do the QR code thing, okay, and do the evaluation. Thank you so much.